Shalom, first and foremost, I'd like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem Kakadash, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who teach the truth and sincerity. And shout out to Yakim out there in four quarters of the earth proclaiming this truth. Bracha the Yahweh, Bracha the Yahushai, Ba'ashem Kakadash, Bracha Tam. So, the terrorists of the world, Esau Edom, is now bombing Somalia. Yes, Somalia is also getting attacked by the terrorists. So I just happened to catch this morning, and so I figured I'd share it.
A leading international human rights organization says the U.S. has dramatically increased the number of its airstrikes in Somalia. Amnesty International said that it carried out detailed investigations into 5 U.S. airstrikes in which at least 14 civilians were killed. Amnesty said the findings contradict Washington's claim that its strikes leave 0 civilian casualties in Somalia. The rights group believes the U.S. air raids could amount to war crimes and are in violation of international humanitarian law. It says that there have been over 100 U.S. airstrikes on the African nation in the past 2 years. The Pentagon says the air attacks are meant to target Al-Shabaab militants, but facts on the ground show mostly civilians have fallen victim to such strikes.
Of course, because that's what Esau Edom always does. They're the terrorists of the world.
Let's bring in Mr. Gordon Duff. He is a senior editor with Veterans Today, who is joining us via Skype out of Ohio. Mr. Duff, as always, it's good to have you with us. Tell me your understanding, sir, of this whole situation. Is it that the U.S. forces do not take enough care in conducting what they deem as necessary to do in Somalia, or is it perhaps something else?
Well, it's something else. Under the best circumstances, the U.S. has deeply flawed intelligence. We got involved in Yemen almost a decade ago in an internal tribal conflict there, choosing one side, naming them as Al-Qaeda, and trying to wipe them out with airstrikes on behalf of another side. In this case, we have chosen a new government for Somalia. We're in the process right now of instilling a government there through a fake revolution. That's going on as we speak. We're using these airstrikes to suppress opposition involved in domestic politics in Mogadishu. That's what we're really doing. I was in Kenya. I was called in 2013 to work with.
You can best believe they're doing this in Venezuela. You already know about the EMP.
And spent some time investigating Al-Shabaab and their organization and exactly who was behind them, how many Western hands and others that more or less confirmed my opinion that there's very little terrorism that isn't involved in serving a broader interest. In this case, the U.S. is finding itself in a tenuous position in the Red Sea. The Red Chinese are, which the communists, as we call them here in the U.S., are developing a military presence in that region. Iran has just moved a flotilla in off the coast of Yemen, and the U.S. is looking at increasing its presence in Somalia, in the region, as events are spinning out of control. And this is part of that effort. The U.S. has a game. The other, of course, is that Trump decided a few weeks ago that he was going to stop admitting to any deaths at all. The U.S. no longer reports civilian deaths, no longer admits anything. And, of course, the United States has withdrawn from not just every international treaty, but every international convention. We're no longer part of the Geneva Convention, the International Criminal Court. And all of that was done ostensibly to protect Israel from negative consequences from ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and continual violations of...
Keep in mind, that's the head tribe of Esau.
You know, and Mr. Duff, something that is very interesting and sad at the same time, obviously, is the fact that international bodies, including Amnesty International, have come out and talked about this not once, not twice, many, many, many times. about things like that happen, and then they say that amounts to war crime. And sadder the fact that basically nothing is done about this. Nothing really changes on the ground.
Well, as I look at the situation in Somalia, it's not that long ago, a number of U.S. agencies, the Defense Intelligence Agency primarily, brought a number of the children of what they picked out as potential leaders for Somalia, and groomed them to return them to the country as part of a U.S. puppet government takeover. We've done the same thing in Afghanistan, certainly Iraq, Kurdish Iraq, and others. And
it's the same scenario over and over again, just like they're trying to do with Venezuela. And so while that being in the Valley of Yehoshaphat, here's what the rest of the international world thinks, especially Persia, about these goddamn terrorists known as the United States.
Top military officials from Iran, Iraq, and Syria sat down for talks in Damascus on Monday. Syria's Minister of Defense, Iran's Chief of Staff of Armed Forces, and his Iraqi counterpart agreed to boost coordination among the three militaries to counter common terrorism-related threats. Syria's defense minister reaffirmed that the entire territory of the country will be liberated from both terrorists and forces he described as occupiers.
Any military presence of any state without an official invitation from the Syrian government is illegal and regarded as occupation. The US and other illegal forces will get out of Syria. The Syrian government will take control of all its territories sooner or later, whether through reconciliation or military power, and Idlib is not an exception.
The three military commanders underlined the importance of foiling the plots by Western allied state sponsors of terrorism that seek to fuel unrest in the region and interfere in independent countries' internal affairs. Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces said terrorists sought to target Iran after Iraq and Syria. Therefore, Iran responded to requests of assistance by Syria and Iraq and stood beside them.
We underline the importance of respecting Syria's sovereignty. Iran is against illegitimate entry of any forces from any country into Syria. We entered Syria at its invitation and will stay there as long as Syria wishes.
The Iraqi army's chief of staff said the security of Syria and Iraq cannot be separated, adding that the two countries will continue coordination via the information center established between them. He also announced the opening of a crossing at their joint borders.
The coming few days will witness the opening of a border crossing between Syria and Iraq, allowing continuation of visits and trade. We have high-level coordination with the Syrian army in the war on Daesh.
Syria and Iraq share a 615-kilometer border, which Daesh used for years for infiltrations and weapons smuggling. There are still terrorist groups in Syria's eastern desert, which the resistance front is planning to eliminate. All three armies wanted to send a message from Damascus that their joint efforts in the fight against terror will continue. Syria, Iran, and Iraq make up an alliance of resistance against terrorism and U.S.-Israeli plots in the region that dates back to years. Today, this front reiterated its determination to prevent the expansion of terrorism and help Syria regain all its territories. Hamad Ali, Press TV, Damascus.
And that's just it, though, is that this war will escalate to the point that Damascus does get destroyed because Amalek, the head tribe of Esau Edom, just will not allow Syria to be liberated. The Most High is gathering all these countries together to pretty much judge them for pleading for the cause of the 12 tribes of Israel. That is the elect of us. So while U.S. occupies Syria, of course, they want you to believe that they're fighting the terrorists, when in fact they're just kind of helping convoy them into Iraq.
The Kurdish and Arab fighters has seized full control over a camp where Daesh terrorists were holed up near the Iraqi border. The U.S.-backed alliance, known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, says that the operation is not over yet. An SDF official says some Daesh terrorists were still confined to a tiny area on the bank of the Euphrates River and had yet to surrender. The group says it's already arrested more than 500 terrorists in Baghouz and Deir el-Zor province. 34,000 civilians have reportedly been evacuated from the operation areas. The SDF has pledged to recapture the city very soon. Daesh has lost almost all territory captured in Syria after the conflict began in the Arab country in 2011.
And which, like everything else, though, they will do this just to make you believe, to give you the illusion that they're fighting the terrorists when, in fact, they're supporting the terrorists. On and on. Oh, look who it is, the journalist that the U.S. was so nice to kidnap. I wonder what she's got to say about what's going on. Well, technically, she just reports the news. She states the facts.
Hassan Rouhani says U.S. sanctions against the Islamic Republic are crimes against humanity.
What the U.S. is doing is a crime against humanity. The U.S. will never achieve its objectives. The U.S. should never think that the great Iranian nation will ever capitulate to Washington's pressure and wrong approach.
Rouhani said the sanctions trigger psychological warfare rather than an economic one. He added that the anti-Tehran measures are aimed at dashing people's hope for the future. The Iranian president noted that Iran has become self-sufficient in producing oil, natural gas, and diesel fuel. He said this has discouraged the U.S. from imposing sanctions on such products. Further, in his remarks, Rouhani said Tehran seeks to establish close ties with all of his neighbors.
We want to have very close relations with all our 15 neighbors. This benefits all regional nations, but works to the detriment of the U.S., Zionism, and the enemies of Islam.
Rouhani was speaking in the southern province of Bushehr, where he officially inaugurated 4 new phases of the South Pars gas field in the Persian Gulf. He said the Iranian nation dealt another blow to the U.S. by launching the projects despite Washington's sanctions on the country's oil sector. The Iranian oil ministry says these phases will increase the country's gas production capacity by up to 110 million cubic meters per day.
So, with Persia having its own field and the U.S. not being a part of that because they're able to trade without the U.S. dollar, this is why the U.S. has moved in on Venezuela in the way that it has, because they're desperate now to try to save their petrodollar. So, back to this devil, once again, just trying to, save face and trying to keep ties with Brazil, which is one of our tribes.
Like Brazil has been making an alliance with the United States, it seems that Maduro and Venezuela and others snuffed this out, even though mainstream reports were saying nothing of this. We knew when they closed down the border with Brazil that they suspected something, and it was highly likely that they were suspecting that mercenaries were coming through the jungles of Brazil. Now, we have the man that they call the Trump of South America meeting with Trump, but before he does so in all of this, he dips in the CIA headquarters.
Welcome to the Saudi Arabia
and what they call an
South
unusual
America
trip.
Yep, got a puppet.
So that's the first place this man went. Then off to do some
He'll be launching more attacks from Brazil. You can best believe
ties,
that.
Diplomatic cooperation. And you know what that means? That means they're going to be an ally militarily. And this has been put into motion for some time. He was one of the first ones to step up and back their Juan Guaido that's countering Maduro in Venezuela. And this is a big move because obviously Brazil is massive and encompasses a lot of space down there in South America. If they have them as an ally, well, militarily, they'll start to have Venezuela surrounded from Colombia, Brazil, and then coming in through the water as well.
Yep, like I said, that's the new Saudi Arabia for South America, because they plan to take out and demolish Venezuela like they did to Iraq. I will be back later for more lesson.